I always enjoy this moment with you, but I want to start off with this. Knock, knock. Ligonier National Conference. Ligonier National Conference, we moved again. We changed the month on you. We changed the start time on you, and you still found us. I actually ran that joke by my 16-year-old daughter. She said it would be okay. Now, to Luke chapter 9, and to be followers of the way as Christ's disciples. As you turn to Luke chapter 9, like all chapters in the Gospels, this is a fascinating piece of real estate. This chapter has in it the feeding of the 5,000. The only miracle, of course, next to the resurrection, to occur in all four Gospels. This chapter has Peter's confession, getting right to the heart of the identity of Christ. This chapter has Christ's first reveal to the disciples that he will come to be crucified. This chapter also has that glorious moment on the Mount of Transfiguration where Jesus appeared in a dazzling array. And this chapter also has a very simple clarion call for discipleship in Luke chapter 9, verse 23. To set the context, I want to begin reading at verse 18 with you of Luke chapter 9. Now it happened that as he was praying alone, the disciples were with him. And he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" And they answered, "John the Baptist, but others say Elijah, and others that one of the prophets of old has risen." Then he said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered, "The Christ of God." And he strictly charged and commanded them to tell this to no one, saying, "The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised." And he said to all, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and the holy angels." In verse 23, we have Christ offering a very straightforward, a very simple invitation, an open invitation. If anyone comes after me. This is discipleship in this context, in this Greco-Roman context. A disciple was a learner, but unlike our contemporary students, the process was a little more intense. The student would attach themselves quite literally to a master and would not only learn of that content of the master, but would follow that master, would see the truth in the content being put into practice, and have an upfront, close-up view of the truth applied. And so Jesus extends this invitation. If anyone will come after me. And this invitation comes with 3 conditions. And we all know this verse. We've probably memorized this verse from the time we were little. And these phrases don't really need a great deal of unpacking. It's probably harder to practice them and to obey them. But here are the conditions. The first is that we deny the self and then take up our cross daily and then follow me. So first, what does it mean to deny ourselves? We have this thing that we need to push down, tamp down, almost on a constant basis. It is the thing called the ego. And Jesus is probably the greatest psychologist of all time to analyze deep into the human self and the human sense of self, to know that we like it to be about us. And that ego comes up. And so to deny ourself literally means to push down that ego. I tell my students that I came of age, my teenage years corresponded perfectly with the 1980s, greatest decade of all time. It's indisputable. And of course, I was a Reagan fan, and on his desk, and a burgundy leather with gold leaf was a saying, "It can be done." But there's another saying of Reagan's that's behind this, and he said, "There is no limit to what good can be done as long as you don't care who gets the credit." And that is so true of us throughout all the aspects of our life. And sometimes that even makes its way into the church. We care about getting the credit because that ego raises up. To deny ourselves is to push down the ego. Calvin said of this verse that we need to give our consent to be reduced to nothing. To give our consent to be reduced to nothing. To deny ourselves is to push down the ego. To deny ourselves is also self-discipline. I tinker in my yard, and I've learned something over the decades. I have to do nothing to get weeds to grow. It's amazing. But if I want good things to grow, I actually have to work hard in this Florida heat. And isn't that true of bad habits and good habits? How hard do we have to work to cultivate bad habits? Not at all. But to have the self-discipline to cultivate the good habits. Now, we put this in terms of the Christian life. Again, we go back to Calvin. It was Calvin and his institutes who used these wonderful expressions of the Christian life as the vivification of life in the Spirit and of the mortification of sin. The bringing to life in the Spirit, this Pauline language of putting on the new man and putting off the old. And John Owen picked up that theme, and the Puritans picked up that theme of the Christian life of living to God and putting death to sin. That's what it means to deny the self, the mortification of sin. To deny the self also means humility. To recognize the other. To recognize that I have something to learn from the other. And to be truly humble. And also, to deny the self means that we are not here for ourselves, but we are here to serve others. Was there anyone more than Christ who illustrated this in his incarnate life? This life of pushing down the ego, this life of discipline, this life of what we call the active obedience of Christ, this life of humility. We go to the great hymn of Philippians chapter 2, and we recognize not that Christ emptied himself of his attributes. That's not what Paul's talking about there in that text. But that Christ set aside his divine position, his place in the very throne room of God, and became man, and lowered himself even more, and took on the form of a servant, and lowered himself even more, and died a shameful death on the cross. Did not Christ in every moment of his incarnation illustrate for us the denial of self? And so if you want to be his disciple, if you want him to be your true master, the first condition, deny yourself. And then Christ says, take up your cross daily. Now, just prior in verse 22, we have the first mention to the disciples of Jesus' coming death. If they were the students of the Old Testament, they would have recognized the prophecies of the Messiah. They would have landed on Isaiah chapter 53. They would have recognized this to come, but the explicit teaching hasn't been there yet. But what was in front of these disciples from the time they were little kids was examples of this horrible act of execution the Romans invented of crucifixion. To say, take up your cross, is to say, can you bear and endure the absolute worst this world has to throw at you? When Calvin again reflects on this verse, he speaks of taking up our cross as living in a fallen world, of the suffering, of enduring whatever our cross is as we live in a fallen world. And you say, well, the non-Christian and the Christian both live in a fallen world. How is that part of discipleship? Because we live in that fallen world trusting that even in this, God is good. Trusting that even in this, providence. Trusting that even in this, his sovereign will is bringing all things to come to pass. But in addition to living in a fallen world that we as disciples of Christ share with the unregenerate, in addition to that, we live in a hostile world. And that's what Jesus is talking about here. Persecution takes different shapes and forms. One of the things you realize as you study church history is that for the majority of the church, for the majority of the time, the church suffers persecution and is on the margins of society. We think of our brothers and sisters right now around this globe in various areas of persecution, of imprisonment, of torture. And we know that we are in a hostile context. We sense it in our own moment, don't we? Whatever we have enjoyed in the previous generations of the American church, we get a sense that this next one is going to be something completely different. We worry, don't we? Those of you who are parents and grandparents who have anxiety over what this next generation may very well face. And we may be moving closer to the reality of the situation of these disciples in the first century than we as an American church ever have been. And we hear Christ's words, take up your cross. It's interesting, isn't it, that maybe the key word here is daily. I think we can suit up for the big moments. We can sort of be ready for those intense times. But all of us know Christianity is lived in the routines. It's lived in the day-to-day. Yesterday was one thing, but today's another day. And will we be faithful in bearing the cross today? And then Jesus says, follow me. Now go back up to verse 22. He just said, the Son of Man must suffer many things. The Son of Man must be rejected. And rejected by who? Rejected by the establishment. Rejected by all those who have power. Rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes. And then be killed. Now he also says, and raised again on the third day, but I'm not sure they heard that. I'm not sure I would have heard that. You know, selective hearing? You say to the 16-year-old, yes, you can have the car tonight. Take out the trash first. And the trash is still there. Car's gone. Follow me. Sounds glorious. Sounds glamorous. But here's what you're signing up for. After Jesus gives these conditions, he shows what a master teacher he is. He gives 3 illustrations, or 3 reasons. And each of them is a fascinating illustration because it has a paradox. And paradoxes are just interesting. They get us thinking. And so the first reason or illustration or paradox is verse 24. For whoever would save his life will lose it. But whoever loses my life, or loses his life rather, for my sake, will save it. You can come after Christ. You can follow Christ as his disciple. You can engage in the denial of self. You can take up your cross. You can follow him. You can put his priority. You put his reality above the perceived reality. Or you can white knuckle, hold on to your life, and make your way and pursue your thing. And enough with this denial of self. It's going to be all about what I can get. I will save my life. And Jesus says, the irony of that is at the end of the day, you will have done nothing but lose it. Now, this is illustrated to me almost perfectly in the novel, The Portrait of Dorian Gray. If only Oscar Wilde, the author, would have embraced the truth that the novel illustrates. But the novel, as you know, tells the story of Dorian Gray, who is this young, accomplished, handsome, and everything going. The world is literally at his doorstep, ready to be opened for him. And he has this sadness overtake him because he knows that eventually it will all start to fade. And so he makes the proverbial deal with the devil, and he has his portrait made. And he, Dorian Gray, the person, will stay young and handsome and untouched by age and the vicissitudes of life. But the portrait, it will age. And with every ugly act of Dorian Gray against his fellow human being, he will not bear a mark, but the portrait will. And so he pursues his life of holding on. And by now, the portrait is so disgusting, revolting, that he stored it in an attic, multiple locks along the way. And one night, overcome with the guilt of his life, he makes his way up to that attic, and the butler hears this tremendous row taking place up there, and it sounds like a fight for the life. And as we have it, he comes onto the scene, and there on the floor is a person, Dorian Gray, ugly and not even recognizable. And there is the portrait of Dorian Gray in his youthful beauty. He lost his life by holding on to it. But Jesus says, if you lose your life, not for some great cause, but for my sake, you'll have it. You'll have it. And then he says another paradox. For what does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses or forfeits himself? I think this story is just so well illustrated in the life of Borden of Yale, heir to the Borden, the dairy family fortune. And just before he entered Yale, where his father had gone and his father had gone, he told all of his friends that he was going to be a missionary. And rather than cheer him on or congratulate him or pat him on the back, they mocked him. And they shook their head in disbelief. Why would you waste your life? You have everything at your doorstep. You can do great things. You can support 1,000 missionaries. What are you doing? Wasting your life. And he wrote in the back of his Bible, no reserves. To honor his parents, he completed his education at Yale. They had hoped he would change his mind. Got to the end of his education, hadn't changed his mind. Was committed as ever to be a missionary. Not well received by his parents. So once again, he writes in the back of his Bible, no retreats. Goes down to Princeton Seminary, studies, has a burden to evangelize Chinese Muslims. So he decides to go to Egypt for a month or for many months rather, to study Arabic so that he could be prepared to be a missionary. And 1 month in, he contracts spinal meningitis and he dies. And many wrote about the wasted life of Borden of Yale. And you know what he wrote in his Bible? Under no reserves, no retreats, no regrets. He knew that what ultimately mattered was the eternal. That's what Jesus is saying, profiting the whole world, or gaining the whole world rather, versus losing your soul. I don't think it's a statement against wealth. I don't think it's a statement against pursuing industry. Christians can do that to the glory of God. The point that Jesus is making, and I believe he uses some form of hyperbole to make it, is that if you think this here and now is what is the purpose of life, you will get to the end and find you have failed at the only test that matters. But if you cultivate an eternal perspective, that what matters is that which transcends the here and now. What was the expression? Right now counts forever. That the soul, the eternal, that is gain. The final paradox that Jesus gives is shame and glory. I think we put this exactly into its first century context. I think we put this exactly into what these disciples would face in the face of Rome. When you take a step back and consider everything that defines Christianity, one of the things you quickly see is that it is the antithesis of Roman culture. For starters, let's go back to self-denial. Humility was never a virtue in the Greco-Roman world. Humility was never a virtue in the Western world. Humility was never a virtue to be found until this book. It wasn't about humility. It was about the assertion of self. It wasn't about a shameful death on the cross, reserved for the most heinous of criminals. No, it was about the exaltation of the self, the triumph of the self. Christianity speaks of our weaknesses. Christianity speaks of dependence. Christianity speaks of the eternal. None of that mattered to Rome. Rome was about strength. Rome was about autonomy and independence. And Rome was about the glory of Rome. And so if you are called to be Christ's disciple, you are called to fly in the face of everything that defines the culture that you live in. And so there will be a temptation upon you, disciple, to be ashamed of Christ. Because you will feel the pinch and you will need to distance yourself from Christ or suffer the consequences. And so Jesus says, if you are ashamed of me before men, I will be ashamed of you before God. And the opposite of shame is this word glory. When the Son of Man when Christ comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels. Let me read for you an extended quote from Calvin on this. Calvin writes, speaking of Christ and his glory and the Father's glory and these holy angels, he says, "These are mentioned to guard his disciples against judging of Christ's kingdom from present appearances. For up until now, Christ was unknown and despised, being concealed under the form and condition of a servant. Christ, then, assures the disciples that it will be far from otherwise when Christ shall appear as judge of the whole world." Calvin is telling us, and this verse is telling us, and Christ is telling us, that the appearance is one thing, and the reality is another. The appearance is Rome, and its power over you, and its power to persecute, and its power to oppress, and its power to kill. That's the appearance. But here's the reality. There's a judgment to come. That Jesus has come in his first coming as a servant. That Jesus has come in his first coming to what we can figure out, essentially a poor family in the most marginal of circumstances of his birth, to an obscure, young, godly mother, and from an obscure village to the north. But make no mistake, he will not come like that the second time. A sword, a double-edged sword protruding from his mouth. That's the image John gives us of Christ coming, as the creeds tell us, in glory and in judgment. And so as a disciple, is the temptation there to be ashamed of being a Christian, of pushing down our Christianity, or maybe even this, accommodating our Christian convictions because the pressure applied is so strong? And Jesus says, that's only the appearance. That is only the appearance. Here is the reality. Jesus Christ is Lord. That's the reality. Caesar is not Lord. Rome is not Lord. What does Luther say? The body they may kill. The body they may kill. You know, if you were to put this all into a risk-reward analysis and set up a balance sheet of what it means to be a disciple. In fact, go ahead and do it. Put a line down. A column on one side, a column on the other. What does it mean to be a disciple? Just from these verses, it means to suffer, from verse 22. It means rejection. In Christ's case, he was killed. It means self-denial. It means bearing the cross. It means enduring the shame. And it means persecution. That's the balance. One side of the ledger. Sign me up, right? Is there a single thing there we like? What did they tell us? We were hardwired to avoid pain, seek pleasure. Everything here is the opposite. But now go to the other side of the ledger and just write one word: glory. 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 It is not a literary accident that following verse 26 and 27 comes the next incident in the incarnate life of Christ. Jesus is such a gracious teacher to us, an incredibly patient teacher, an incredibly loving and merciful teacher. How we all wish our teachers were like Jesus. Because not only does he tell the disciples about glory, but he gives them just even a glimpse. That in the glimpse of this, they will know that being a disciple so far outweighs any of the negatives, any of the challenges. And so we have the Transfiguration. Verse 29, we're told that the appearance of his face was altered. That his clothing became dazzling white, and all of its splendor, and all of its purity, translucence. But then here comes the best in verse 32. 4 little words: they saw his glory. Just a taste. Just a taste of the reality to come, because disciples, the appearances can be pretty overwhelming. The in-between of Christ bringing us to himself and bringing us to home with the Father in glory can have its difficulties. And so, as an encouragement, as just a taste, here is what you have to look forward to. Unmitigated, unhindered, immediate presence of the glory of God. That's what awaits the disciples of Jesus Christ. You know, I think Paul understood this precisely when he told us about these light and momentary afflictions. He's not discrediting them. He's not discounting them. He's not a stoic. They're afflictions. They're real. And people we love will suffer as Christ's disciples. But let's put them into perspective. They are light and they are momentary, again, on the balance sheet. And he plays off the very definition of glory itself, kabod, that Old Testament word, gravitas, weight. The great weight of glory. You know who else I think understood this was David. I'm going to read as our closing prayer, Psalm 57. But before I do, let me just say this. As disciples of Christ, look at the balance sheet. Christ always spoke truthfully. There's no fine print. You come to me, this is what it means. Suffering and rejection and persecution and self-denial. But there is a glory that awaits that outstrips it all. David is suffering at the hands of his enemy, Saul. He's called by God. And Saul has put the whole army of Israel against him. And David's in a cave. And he's a musician. So he writes a song. And so we close in prayer. To the choir master, according to do not destroy, a miktam of David when he fled from Saul in the cave. Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me, for in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings I will take refuge, till the storms of destruction pass by. I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purpose for me. He will send from heaven and save me. He will put to shame him who tramples on me, Selah. God will send out his steadfast love and his faithfulness. My soul is in the midst of lions. I lie down amid fiery beasts, the children of man whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. They set a net for my steps. My soul was bowed down. They dug a pit in my way, but they have fallen into it themselves. Selah. My heart is steadfast, O God, my heart is steadfast. I will sing and make melody. Awake, my glory, awake. O harp and lyre, I will awake the dawn. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing praise to you among the nations, for your steadfast love is great to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. In the name of the one who has called us to be his disciples, in the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen.